The final topic in this particular part of the course is intra-industry rivalry. That is, what's going on within the industry itself. We're going to see that there's going to be two sort of polar opposite outcomes. There could either be competition among the firms in the industry, or at the other extreme, they could cooperate with each other. In Porter's Five Forces model, this intra-industry rivalry is really at the heart of the model. And that's what we think about when we think about whether an industry is competitive or not. We're really thinking about how firms in the same industry are interacting with each other. As we'll see, economists have studied this kind of situation for a long time, and I think perhaps they've overly focused their efforts on the choice of prices and price rivalry, perhaps because it's easier to create theories about prices given that we can measure prices, and it's more difficult to measure things like the extent to which products are differentiated from each other and so on. The central question that I'm going to focus on is what happens in the industry. Do firms peacefully coexist, or do they compete forcefully with each other? Now, this question is most relevant if we've just got a few firms in the industry. In other words, if we've got an oligopoly. Now, there could be a number of small firms in the industry as well, but they have relatively small shares of the market. The key feature of this kind of market is what we could call strategic interaction between the firms. That is, the action of one firm is going to be noticed by the other firms in the market, and they may choose to react to the actions of other firms. That was really not the case in monopolistic competition. In monopolistic competition, you had a lot of small firms, and they didn't really pay attention to the actions of the other ones. And so there was no real issue of whether they would respond to the actions of other firms. The reason is, again, that each firm has such a small share of the market that the action of any one firm doesn't really affect the other firms in any significant way. So they don't really pay much attention. Just imagine a simple example. Let's say we've got a lot of barber shops or hair salons in even a city the size of St. John. If one of them changes its price, are the other ones really going to notice? Are they going to respond? Is there going to be a price war? Probably not. However, if you have just a few dominant firms in a market, then the actions of one will have a significant impact on the other ones. So I'm going to stress that there's two main extreme outcomes. Cooperation, where effectively firms might divide the market up among themselves or segment the market, and each could have its own part. That could take the form of collusion, as we'll see. In other words, firms could openly cooperate, or maybe secretly cooperate. That would be safer from a legal point of view. Or, as we'll see, more likely, firms might develop some kind of tacit collusion. In other words, they don't have to talk to each other, but they find ways of cooperating. And at the other extreme, we could have competition, whether it's in terms of prices, product innovation, research and development that leads to new techniques and new products, or perhaps even firms changing their location in some strategic way. Well, let's have a look at a simple model of an oligopoly. This is a model called Bertrand competition. And obviously it's named after someone named Bertrand. In this case, Joseph Bertrand, a French mathematician and economist who lived in the 19th century. There was a lot of debate, actually, among French economists in the middle of the 1800s concerning how firms would behave in some simple oligopolistic situation. And Bertrand came up with a simple model, as we'll see. So the idea is to just consider a very simple situation. We're going to imagine that we've got just two firms in the model. So an oligopoly that has just two firms is called a duopoly. And to keep things simple, we'll assume that the firms are producing identical goods and that they have identical and constant marginal costs. So, a very simple story. We'll also assume that the firms decide on prices simultaneously. And those prices can take any of two extremes. One would be the monopoly price, where both firms effectively act as if they're a single firm. So they both set the monopoly price, and whatever the size of the market demand would be at that monopoly price, they will share the market and share the monopoly profits. We'll have a look at that in a diagram in a moment. The other extreme is that they could charge a competitive price. That is, a price is so low that it just allows them to cover their costs, leaving them with zero economic profits. So again, as usual, when we talk about costs, we're also talking about opportunity costs. On the buyer's side, again, keeping things simple, because each firm just produces an identical good, and we could imagine them located in exactly the same place with a rate beside each other, the buyers consider only the price. And they're going to buy from the lowest cost firm. Whoever charges the lowest price is going to get all the business. We're also going to assume, as part of the story, that the firms can't make an agreement between themselves about what price they're going to charge. So they make the choice of price independently of each other. So if this is the story, we can illustrate it in this simple picture here. So this is our price setting situation, and we can see the two extreme prices that could be chosen. The monopoly price, or prices all the way down to the competitive price here. Now I put this line showing the combinations of prices that the firms could choose. Here's the price chosen by firm 1 on this axis, the price chosen by firm 2 on this axis. And we know from the assumptions of the model that the firms have to charge the same price. Otherwise, they would have no business. And so the prices lie along a 45-degree line where the price of firm 1 and the price of firm 2 would be equal. And here's our maximum price, the monopoly price, and here's the price that would just cover costs. So that's the set of choices of prices that the firms have. Let's have a look at the market in a more familiar setting. So here is the market demand that faces both firms together. We can also see the associated marginal revenue curve that would face a monopoly firm. Of course, we don't have a monopoly here, but we have two firms who could potentially coordinate their actions and act as a monopolist. In this simple model, we're going to assume that marginal costs are constant, as I've been doing throughout the course, but Bertrand also simplified the situation by assuming that there were no fixed costs. So if we don't have any fixed costs, then that's the same thing as saying that all costs are variable. So if the firm wants to produce some more output, that's going to be a change in total cost, which is equal to variable cost. And so if marginal costs are constant, that's also going to reflect what average costs are. Now that might seem like a kind of extreme assumption, but in fact it's not. If you allow enough time to pass, all costs that are currently fixed could be varied. I haven't gone into the theory of costs in any real detail in this course, just trying to avoid some of those, I think, unnecessary complications. So anyway, we have a very simple situation in which we've got constant average costs which are equal to marginal costs. So this tells us what the monopoly quantity would be, maximizing profits, where marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal. The demand curve tells us what the monopoly price would be in that situation. And the competitive price that just covers costs is obviously going to be this one here. And so if the firm charged that price, if the firms charged that price, they would be together producing this competitive quantity. Very well. What actually happens in this Bertrand model? The logic is really very simple. We know that each firm can't set a higher price than its competitor, or nobody will buy from it. So each firm knows that it's going to have to set a price that's no higher than its competitor sets, and therefore it's going to realize that it's got an incentive to always undercut the competitor's price. And we're going to also just make the simplifying assumption that each firm has enough capacity to produce that it could produce for the entire market. If the competitor set a price that was higher than yours, then you could take the entire market for yourself. Where does this logic take us? Well, the only price that you can set that makes any sense here is the competitive price. If you set a price that's any more than that, then you run the danger that the competitor is going to undercut you and set a lower price and take the entire market. So each firm, kind of realizing the logic of the situation, is going to set the competitive price and will just cover their costs. So they'll make zero economic profits. This situation is called an equilibrium. And it's an equilibrium in the sense that neither firm has any incentive to change its price, in this case to raise its price, given what its competitor has chosen to do. This situation is described as a Nash equilibrium. This is named after the mathematician John Nash, who did a lot of work on strategic situations in the early 1950s. So a Nash equilibrium is just defined as I've written here. It's just a situation where neither player has any incentive to change what they're doing, to change their strategy, given the strategies that the other players, or the other, in this case, the other firms in the industry have adopted. So in the Bertrand case, we're going to be left with the competitive price and zero economic profits. You can easily see that it would make no sense for one of the firms to try and raise its price in that situation, because it would lose the market completely. So price competition in this Bertrand model is going to drive profits down to zero, economic profits to zero, despite the fact that we only have two firms in the market. Well, in the next set of slides, I'm going to briefly consider a different model of price competition.